Some men hold on to a farm the same way they hold on to everything else that matters, quietly, without making a show of it, and sometimes without anyone around them understanding why. Dale Harmon had been holding on for 14 years. Through 3 dry summers. Through 2 years of corn prices that barely covered seed costs. Through a loan that had grown faster than anything he ever planted. Through the death of his wife Ruth, who was the one person who always believed the land was worth keeping. And through the laughter of his own sons. Not the kind of cruel laughter that tears a man down, but the kind that's worse. The patient, tired, moved past hoping kind. His family thought the farm was finished. The bank had sent 3 certified letters. Neighbors had quietly stopped asking how things were going. And Marcus, Dale's oldest, had already made a call to a land investment company in Des Moines. None of them knew what was inside the bank's next letter. Before we go any further, if you've ever held on to something that everyone around you had already let go of, drop a comment below. Tell me what it was, because this story is for you. Dale Harmon's name doesn't appear in any headline. His farm isn't famous. What happened to him is the kind of thing that gets buried in loan documents and certified mail, quiet, institutional, enormous. But the story of what that bank's letter actually said and what it did to a family that had already started to grieve is the kind of thing you don't forget. Let's go back to the beginning. Warren County, Iowa sits in the south-central part of the state, just below Polk County, where Des Moines sits with its glass office buildings and its full parking lots. Down in Warren County, the landscape flattens out into something quieter. Long rows of corn and soybeans, gravel roads that run perfectly straight for miles, and farmsteads set back off the road with windbreaks of trees planted 50, 60 years ago by men who knew they were building something meant to outlast them. Dale Harmon's grandfather planted 3 of those tree rows. His father added the machine shed in 1971. Dale himself built the grain bin in 1998, the year he and Ruth got married, the year he took over the note on the farm from his father for $1, a handshake, and a kitchen table promise. The farm was 340 acres, mostly corn, some soybeans on the lighter ground near the creek, a small hay field that Dale kept even after he sold the cattle, because Ruth had liked how it looked in July, that particular shade of green before the first cutting. Dale was 58 years old when the last letter came. He had the kind of face that didn't give much away, deep-set eyes, a jaw that sat square and still, hands that looked like they belonged to a man 20 years older. He'd been farming for 35 years, and he wore every one of them. Ruth had died 22 months before. Pancreatic cancer. 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Dale had sat with her every night in the hospital in Indianola, and when she came home on hospice, he'd rearranged the living room so her bed faced the east window, so she could see the fields in the morning light. She told him, the second to last week, "Don't you dare sell it." He didn't answer her. He just held her hand. That was the only promise that mattered. Marcus, the older son, was 33 and lived in Des Moines. He worked in agricultural equipment sales, good salary, company truck, a 401k that he checked every quarter. He understood farming in the modern sense, which is to say he understood the numbers better than he understood the soil. He loved his father. That's important to say. He wasn't a villain. He was a man who had watched his parents struggle for most of his life and had decided, quietly, firmly, that he was going to live differently. Kevin was 30. He lived in Ames, worked at a feed and seed co-op, and still came back to help plant in the spring if Dale asked him. Kevin was the kind of man who would rather say nothing than say the wrong thing. He'd stand at the end of a field row and watch his father work, and you'd never quite know what he was thinking. The 3 of them had barely talked about the farm since the funeral. They'd talked around it, about taxes, equipment maintenance, whether Dale was eating enough, but not about the central question that had been sitting in the middle of every conversation for 2 years. What happens now? Dale had answered that question without words. He planted. He tended. He harvested. He paid what he could on the loan, signed what the bank put in front of him, and kept going. That was his answer. His neighbor Earl Dressler, a 74-year-old corn farmer 3 miles north, was one of the few people who understood. Earl had driven over twice that winter with a casserole and a thermos of coffee, sat at Dale's kitchen table without saying much, and left when the coffee was gone. No advice, no opinions, just presence. Dale appreciated that more than he could say. The farm had one other character worth knowing. The 12-acre parcel at the far northwest corner of the property, near Squaw Creek. Wet ground, black, heavy, reluctant to drain. Dale's father had always called it the problem corner. It flooded in wet springs and baked to cracked clay in dry summers. It had never been fully productive, and yet no one in the family had ever once suggested they get rid of it. It was just there like a stubborn relative, part of the place, part of the story, quietly waiting to become something else. The financial picture at the Harmon farm in the fall before everything changed was this. A production loan balance of $341,200 with First Central Agricultural Bank in Indianola, a note that had originated in 2009 when Dale refinanced after a hailstorm took his entire corn crop. The original loan had been $198,000. 14 years of interest, 2 restructurings, 1 drought year in which Dale deferred principal payments, and relentless commodity price pressure had grown that number to where it sat now. Operating costs for the farm ran approximately $287 per acre. Seed, fertilizer, chemicals, fuel, equipment maintenance, a part-time hired hand during planting and harvest. On 340 acres, that was roughly $97,600 a year just to put a crop in the ground. Corn prices that year had averaged $4.31 per bushel. Dale's proven yield was 178 bushels per acre. The gross revenue in a good year was about $260,000. After operating costs, land taxes, and the equipment loan for the combine he'd bought used in 2018, what was left for the mortgage was never quite enough. Not quite enough. That phrase had been the background noise of Dale's financial life for most of the past decade. It was a grinding kind of pressure, not dramatic, not the sudden terror of a foreclosure notice on the door, but the slow accumulation of years where you pay what you can, sign what they put in front of you, and hope next year holds something different. Dale had received 2 default notices in the past 3 years, both resolved by selling equipment and making partial payments. The first time he sold the old field cultivator. The second time, he sold the disc harrow his father had bought in 1979. Each time, he told himself he was solving a problem. But a farm is a system. Every piece removed makes the system less able to handle the next problem. He knew that. He sold anyway. The drought that hit Warren County that summer hadn't been catastrophic, not like the 2012 drought that people still talked about, but it was persistent. July rains came 12 days late. The corn set ears under heat stress. Yield dropped from 178 bushels per acre down to 142. That was nearly a $100,000 swing in gross revenue. Not survivable without going deeper into the operating line. By October, Dale owed an additional $63,000 on top of the base note. In November, the first certified letter came from Janet Combs, his loan officer at First Central. Dale read it standing at the kitchen counter, then set it down and went out to check the grain bin. He didn't tell either of his sons. He should have. He knows that now. But there was a particular shame in those numbers. Not about the farm, never that, but shame about the distance between what he believed was possible and what the ledger showed. He was a man who had never asked anyone for much, and the idea of calling his sons to read them a default notice over the phone felt like a kind of surrender he wasn't ready for. So he didn't, and the pressure kept building quietly, the way pressure does when no one is allowed to see it. Marcus found out not through Dale, but through Donna, his wife, who had called Dale to ask about Thanksgiving and noticed, the way perceptive people always notice, that his voice sounded different. Tighter, shorter, she told Marcus that night. Marcus called Kevin the next morning. They talked for 47 minutes. Kevin was reluctant to jump to conclusions. Marcus had already jumped and landed hard. He can't keep going like this, Marcus said. The farm is bleeding him dry. It was bleeding them both dry for years. And now there's no mom to help carry it. And he won't ask for help. And at some point somebody has to say what's true. Kevin was quiet for a while. Then, he's not going to want to hear that from us. He doesn't have to want to hear it. He has to hear it. That phone call was the beginning of what would become a 6-month argument, conducted mostly in glances, in half-finished sentences, in the particular silence of a family that loves each other but cannot find words for the thing that really needs to be said. The Saturday morning after the first default letter arrived, Dale drove to the cemetery before the sun was fully up. It's a small country cemetery, Grace Hill, about 4 miles northeast of the farm, up a gravel road that turns muddy in rain. Ruth's stone was still newer looking than the ones around it. The grass hadn't fully settled over the mound yet. Dale stood there for a while with his hands in his coat pockets. He wasn't a man who talked much in general, and he wasn't sure exactly how to talk to someone who wasn't there anymore. But he stood in the quiet and the cold, and he thought about what she had said in that hospital room, and he thought about what the farm still meant, and after a while he said something, just quietly, just to himself or to whatever was listening. I don't know how this ends, but I'm not done yet. That was it. No long prayer. No bargaining. Just one sentence spoken to the cold and the frost and the stone. He drove back to the farm. He made coffee. He looked at the fields through the east window, the same window Ruth had faced in her last weeks, and he noticed that the cover crop he'd planted in the northwest corner was holding. The 12-acre problem corner, the wet ground near the creek. Even in the dead of winter, something was still growing there. He didn't know what that meant yet, but he noticed it. The second letter from First Central Agricultural Bank arrived on a Thursday in early February. Dale recognized the envelope before he even picked it up. The bank's return address in the upper left corner, the word certified stamped in red, the particular weight of paper that matters. He'd missed the delivery the day before and had driven to the Indianola post office himself to collect it. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for a few minutes before he opened it. The letter informed Dale that First Central had been selected to participate in a USDA Farm Loan Portfolio Review Program, a federal initiative requiring participating lenders to conduct a full audit and reappraisal of all agricultural loans originated before 2015 that had been restructured more than once. Dale's loan qualified on both counts. Originated 2009, restructured twice. A third-party loan auditor will be contacting him to schedule an on-site visit and records review. The purpose, to verify loan terms, evaluate current asset valuation, and assess the farm's long-term financial viability under federal lending guidelines. Dale read it twice, then a third time. He wasn't sure if this was good news or the formal beginning of the end. He called Janet Combs. Janet had been his loan officer for 9 years. She was a practical woman, careful with her words, not unkind. She explained the portfolio review was a federal mandate. Neither the bank nor Dale had a choice. She said the auditor's name was Roger Tidwell, out of Ames, and that Roger was experienced with agricultural loans and would be straightforward with him. He's going to ask for your original loan documents going back to 2009, Janet said. Do you have those? Dale said he did. Ruth had kept every document related to the farm in a fireproof lockbox under the bed in the spare room. Lease agreements, purchase records, insurance certificates, equipment titles, and the original promissory note from 2009, signed by Dale and countersigned by Ruth. He thanked Janet and hung up. That night, he pulled the lockbox out from under the bed. He hadn't opened it since the estate attorney had needed certain documents the previous spring. The smell of it, old paper, the faint trace of whatever cedar thing Ruth had tucked inside, stayed with him for a moment before he reached in. He found the 2009 note, the restructuring agreements from 2014 and 2019, the amortization schedules from each closing. He spread them across the kitchen table and looked at them for a long time, not with understanding. He wasn't a loan auditor, but with the instinct of a man who had been told these numbers were accurate for 14 years and was now, for the first time, asking himself whether he'd ever really checked. Roger Tidwell arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks later. He drove a modest Ford sedan and carried a leather briefcase and a laptop. He was 52, wore reading glasses on a lanyard, and had a quiet, methodical way of moving through a room that made Dale think of a man who had seen a lot of farms and wasn't in a hurry to judge any of them. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where every important thing in the Harmon family had ever been decided. Roger went through the original note first. He asked about the 2014 restructuring, specifically about the interest rate applied to the deferred principal from the drought year. Dale told him what he remembered. Roger made notes. He asked about the 2019 restructuring as well, why it was done, what rate was applied, how the existing balance had been carried over. They worked through the documents for about 2.5 hours. Then Roger said he needed to walk the property, specifically the fence lines, the structures, and the northwest corner near the creek. They went out in the February cold. Roger took photographs. He spent a long time at the northwest corner, more time than Dale expected, standing at the edge of the wet ground with his phone out, looking at something on a map application. Dale asked what he was looking at. Roger said he was checking the Farm Service Agency wetland determination records. Dale said he didn't know what that meant. Roger said he'd explain once they got back inside. Back at the kitchen table, Roger poured himself more coffee. He opened his laptop and looked at something for a long moment. Then he put on his glasses. "Mr. Harmon," he said, "I'm going to need to run some numbers tonight and talk to our team before I can say anything definitive. But I want you to know, I've found some things in your loan documents that I think need to be looked at carefully." "What kind of things?" "There may be a compounding error in how your 2019 restructuring carried the prior deferred balance. If what I'm seeing is correct, your interest has been calculated against a base that was higher than your actual principal at the time of restructuring." "What does that mean in plain language?" "It means you may have been overpaying, and if you have, that overpayment is a credit that belongs to you and would be applied against your principal balance." Dale looked at him. "I'm not promising anything tonight," Roger said. "I need to verify this. But I'm telling you now because I don't like to let a man go home without knowing there might be better news coming." Dale thanked him. Roger packed his briefcase and left. Dale sat alone at the kitchen table, Ruth's table, long after the taillights disappeared down the gravel road. He did not call his sons that night. It was around this same period, January and February, the dead months between harvest and planting, that Marcus pushed hardest. He'd come out to the farm on a Saturday in mid-January without calling ahead. Dale had seen his truck coming up the road from the kitchen window and felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear of his son, but the particular fatigue of a man who knows a hard conversation is coming and has been carrying its weight before it even starts. Marcus came in, took off his coat, sat down. He'd brought coffee from town, a small gesture Dale recognized as Marcus's version of an olive branch. They talked about nothing important for 20 minutes. The weather, an implement dealer in Indianola closing one of its service bays, the neighbor boy driving the county road too fast. Then Marcus set down his cup. "Dad, I want to talk about the farm." "Okay. I've been looking at some numbers. I talked to a land broker just to understand options, not to do anything, just to know what's possible." The ground is worth somewhere between $7,000 and $8,000 an acre right now. If you sold and paid off the note, you'd walk away with, he did the mental math, close to $2 million. Maybe more. You wouldn't have to work this hard anymore. You wouldn't have to worry every November. You've earned the right to rest. Dale looked at his coffee. The farm died with Mom, Marcus said quietly. Let it go. Silence. That sentence landed like something physical. Not because it was cruel, Marcus hadn't meant it to be, but because it put words to the fear that Dale had been fighting in himself for 22 months. That maybe the farm without Ruth in it was just a piece of ground. Just a debt. Just a number on a ledger that was going in the wrong direction. Dale looked up. His voice was level. That's not true, he said. And you know it. Dad, I hear you. I understand what you're telling me. And I'm not selling. Marcus shook his head. He wasn't angry. He was resigned. He believed his father was making a choice out of grief rather than logic, holding on to a promise made to a woman who was gone rather than facing what was real. He wasn't wrong to worry. He was wrong about what his father was holding on to. You're going to lose it anyway, Marcus said. At least this way, you choose the terms. Kevin had been at the farm the weekend before that. He and Dale had worked on the grain bin auger, a mechanical problem, something solvable, and afterward they'd stood by the truck in the cold. I don't want to tell you what to do, Kevin said. I just want you to know that whatever happens, I'm not against you. Marcus isn't either, even if it sounds that way. Dale nodded. He just doesn't know how to watch you struggle. Kevin said, neither do I, if I'm being honest. Dale put his hand on his younger son's shoulder. One grip, brief, and then he let go. Neither of them said anything else. But something had passed between them. Not agreement, not resolution, but the simple acknowledgement that they were still, underneath all of it, on the same side. The hardest part wasn't the argument. The hardest part was the quiet that followed it. Dale had dinner alone most nights. He worked alone most days. Earl Dressler came over once in February with a thermos, and they sat at the kitchen table for an hour, talking about seed costs and whether the late-season moisture had set up a good soil profile for spring. When Earl left, Dale stood at the east window for a while. The fields were frozen and gray. Not beautiful, not promising. Just waiting. Dale was waiting too. 3 days after Roger Tidwell's visit, Dale went through the loan documents again. This time, he was more deliberate. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing numbers. The original 2009 balance, the rate, the deferred amount from the drought year, the opening balance of the 2019 note. He was trying to trace how one number became another. He couldn't fully parse what he was looking at, but the more he went through it, the more he could see that something in the transition from the 2014 restructuring to the 2019 one didn't add up the way he would have expected. A balance that should have been smaller was bigger. The starting point of the last note looked higher than the math suggested it should be. He drove to the library in Indianola the next day and spent 2 hours on one of the public computers reading about how compounding errors happen in restructured agricultural loans. How a deferred principal, if not properly reset at a restructuring date, can create a compounding basis that carries forward, growing the interest calculation against a figure that's larger than the real remaining principal. He didn't understand every word of what he read, but he understood enough. He wrote a rough estimate on the legal pad, the gap between what he thought the balance should be and what it was. His estimate ran somewhere between $80,000 and $140,000. He sat with that number for a long time. He didn't call Marcus. He didn't call Kevin. He wasn't certain enough, and he wasn't going to hand his sons a number that might not be real and let them mistake hope for fact. But for the first time in a long time, Dale allowed himself to think forward. Not with certainty, not with relief. That was too early. But with a guarded, eyes open kind of hope that didn't feel like wishful thinking. It felt like something he'd earned the right to feel. Around the same time, he made a practical decision. He called the Warren County FSA office and asked about the Conservation Reserve Program for wetland acres. He'd seen Roger pause at the northwest corner, noticed the interest Roger had taken in the wetland records. He wasn't going to wait to find out what that meant. The FSA county director, a woman named Lori Brands, was familiar with the Harmon parcel. She told Dale the 12-acre northwest corner had actually been tentatively flagged for wetland designation back in 2011. But the formal determination had never been completed because the application, started by Dale's father before he transferred the farm, had been withdrawn and never refiled. If Dale wanted to pursue a formal wetland determination and CRP enrollment, the process could begin that spring. She told him the CRP payment rate per acre, per year, for certified wetland-adjacent buffer acres in Warren County. Dale wrote the number down. It wasn't enormous, but it was consistent. It was guaranteed. It was income that did not depend on rainfall or corn prices or whether the combine held together one more harvest. He thanked Lori Brands and drove home. He stood in the kitchen, looking at the legal pad, the loan figures, the rough error estimate, the CRP payment rate. He couldn't say he'd won anything yet, but he could see for the first time in a long time that there might be a path. Not a miracle, a path. Specific, real, built from things that had been sitting on his own property, in his own documents, waiting to be found. He cooked dinner that night, a real one, not just bread and soup. He ate it at the kitchen table with the lamp on, instead of in the chair by the TV in the dark, where he'd been eating most nights that winter. It was a small thing, but it was a choice, and choices matter. Roger Tidwell's full report was delivered to First Central Agricultural Bank in the third week of March. Dale got the call from Janet Combs on a Wednesday afternoon. He was in the machine shed working on the planter when his phone rang on the workbench across the shed. His hands were greasy. He almost didn't get up. Something made him go to it. "Mr. Harmon, I have the results of the loan audit. Do you have a minute to talk, or would you rather come in?" "Tell me now." A short pause. Then Janet said, "Roger's report confirmed the error he flagged. In your 2019 restructuring, the opening balance was calculated using a compounding method that applied interest against a deferred principal figure that should have been reset at the 2014 settlement date. The error has been running forward since 2019. What does that mean for my balance?" The corrected balance, as of today, is $187,400. Dale said nothing for a moment. The overpayment credit, the difference between what you've paid and what you actually owed, has been applied to the principal. The remaining balance after that credit is $187,400. That's $154,000 less than what I was told I owed. "Yes," Janet said. "That's correct." He sat down on an overturned 5-gallon bucket next to the planter. The bank is also prepared to offer a restructured note on the corrected balance. 10-year term, fixed rate, at current USDA guaranteed loan rates. The monthly payment on that note would be significantly lower than what you've been carrying. Dale stared at the floor, an oil stain that had been there since 1987. "Are you telling me," he said slowly, "that this farm can service this note? Based on your proven yield, current commodity projections, and factoring in the CRP enrollment that our appraiser noted as a viable asset? Yes, Mr. Harmon, the farm can service this note." Silence. "I want to apologize," Janet said, and her voice had changed, something more personal in it now. "This error should have been caught sooner. The bank is sorry it wasn't." Dale thanked her, told her he'd be in to sign as soon as she had it ready. He hung up. He sat on the 5-gallon bucket for a while, in the machine shed that his father had built, with the planter his father had used parked beside him, the oil stain on the floor that had been there before his sons were born. He didn't cry. He sat very still. Then he stood up, picked up the shop rag, and finished what he'd been doing with the planter. After that, he went inside and called Marcus. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Come out to the farm. Today if you can. Call your brother." Marcus arrived just after dark. Kevin had driven up from Ames. They sat at the kitchen table, the three of them, for the first time since Thanksgiving. Dale set the legal pad with his handwritten numbers in the middle of the table. He told them about Roger Tidwell's visit, the error, Janet's call that afternoon, the new number. Marcus picked up the legal pad. Read it the way he read financial documents, slowly, checking each line. Then he set it down. He looked at his father. $187,000, he said quietly. "That's what they told me." Another long silence. Kevin sat still, looking at the table. Then Marcus said, "Dad, I told you to sell." Dale nodded. "I told you the farm was gone." I said. He stopped, swallowed. "I laughed at you, not to your face, but I did. I told Donna it was grief making you hold on. I told Kevin you were being stubborn. You were worried about me. I was wrong." Something in Marcus's voice that Dale hadn't heard in a long time. Not softness exactly, because Marcus wasn't built for softness, but something close to it. Something honest. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Kevin put his hand on Marcus's arm. Neither of them said anything. Dale looked at his sons, at the legal pad, at the lamp above the table that Ruth had picked out from a hardware store in Indianola that had since closed. "Your mother said not to sell it," he said finally. No one spoke. "She was right," he said. Planting season came the first week of May, the way it always does in Iowa. The fields finally dry enough, the soil temperature finally right, the air still cool in the mornings, but carrying the first real warmth of the year. Dale had signed a restructured note in early April. The new monthly payment was $1,840, $600 less than what he'd been carrying on the old note, on a balance more than $150,000 smaller. He'd enrolled the 12 Northwest acres in the CRP wetland program. The first annual payment would come in July. Not a fortune, but reliable. Year after year, regardless of what the corn market did. He bought new seed, serviced the planter properly, hired young Tommy Reese from 2 miles north, a 19-year-old who needed summer work and could drive a tractor without being told twice. The morning the planter went in the ground for the first time that spring, Marcus was there. He'd driven out from Des Moines the night before and stayed in his old bedroom. In the morning he came downstairs in work clothes, jeans and boots that still had a warehouse smell on them, and asked Dale what he needed. "You can run the service truck. Keep the seed tender topped off, watch the field monitors on the tablet. Call me on the radio if anything goes sideways." "I can do that." They worked 14 hours. Tommy drove the tractor. Marcus ran the tender. Dale walked the field edges in the afternoon. Not because he had to, but because he always had, because the feel of the soil turning was the thing that reminded him every spring why any of it was worth it. In the late afternoon, when the sun was low and the air had turned golden the way it does in Iowa in early May, that particular light that changes every 30 seconds and painters have never quite gotten right, Dale stopped at the northwest corner. The 12 acres were enrolled now. Fenced off. A CRP sign from the FSA stapled to a fence post. No corn there. No beans. Just native grasses starting to come back. Cover holding, the creek at the edge of it running clear after the spring rains. The problem corner. Dale stood there for a moment. Not long. There was still work to do and daylight to use. He thought about his grandfather planting the windbreak trees, his father building the machine shed, Ruth facing the east window, the lockbox under the bed in the spare room, Roger Tidwell standing at this exact spot in February, looking at a map on his phone. He thought about the oil stain on the machine shed floor, the lamp above the kitchen table, the 2009 promissory note that had been in the fireproof box all along, waiting for someone to read it carefully. He put his hand on the fence post and felt the rough wood under his palm. Then he turned around and walked back to the field. The planter was still moving. Marcus was on the radio, checking in. The soil was dark and open and ready. Some things you hold on to because you're stubborn and people are right to question you. And some things you hold on to because you know, not perfectly, not without doubt, but in the deep, quiet way that doesn't need anyone else's agreement, that the thing is still alive. Dale Harmon knew the difference. He always had. He just needed the rest of the world to catch up. Dale Harmon didn't end up in any newspaper. No one made a speech about what happened to him. The bank corrected its error because a federal audit found it. Not because of a dramatic legal fight. Not because a hero appeared. Just paperwork. Just time. Just a man who didn't leave when everyone expected him to. The farm is still there. The corn comes up every spring. The northwest corner is quiet now. Native grass, bird song, and the creek doing what creeks do. And the kitchen table still sits under the lamp Ruth picked out from a hardware store that closed 20 years ago. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I mean it sincerely. Have you ever held on to something, a piece of land, a family business, a house, a dream, when everyone around you said it was already over? What made you stay? What finally made you let go, if you did? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one of them. The stories people share down there are as real as anything in this video, and they matter. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who's in the middle of a hard season right now. Not someone who has it figured out. Someone who's still holding on and isn't sure why. That's who this was for. Thank you for being here with the bank and the barn. We'll see you in the next story.